Hello there, kia ora. Joining us today, we have Arana Williams, Labour MP, here to talk to us about construction and the changes that have been announced within that field. Morning, Arana. I see you are in the makeshift studio at the moment. How are things going?
Morning. Thank you for having me. Yes, I am in South Auckland. I'm on my way to the Auckland airport. This is actually a big construction site. 20,000 people work in the airport precinct every day, and a number of them are construction workers who are expanding the terminal between domestic and international, which will see not only a pipeline of infrastructure investment here in South Auckland, but those jobs being supported through a downturn when the construction sector really needs it.
I love the upgrades that they've done to the airport. They're inconvenient as hell, like 12 months ago when everything was shut down and you had to walk a million miles. But even the new car park building is so well designed for people who are there to travel or visit. It's coming across really nicely.
I completely
With
agree.
that kind of construction work in the area, how much of an investment is that's being pumped into South Auckland at the moment?
Yeah, really good question. And if I can bring your listeners back to how this came to be, the three airports that are regulated airports in New Zealand, including Auckland Airport, they're regulated monopolies, so they have to go through a process of negotiating how much they're spending on a construction project like this with the airlines, mainly Air New Zealand. So the full bill of the construction project is a work in progress. It's an iterative process that gets negotiated. So we won't know as Aucklanders how much is going to be spent on the full project until it is completed. But what we do know is that this has supported thousands of jobs while it's been going at its peak. Now you're seeing quite a different kind of project where they're actually finishing the levels at the moment. And it's been really interesting to see the way that this investment, which is it's long-term infrastructure, but it's not something that comes straight out of the government's balance sheet, has been enabled by that kind of regulation of the Commerce Commission and negotiated between the airlines. It's a model that seems to be working at the moment and in a counter-cyclical way right now, where even though the government has turned off its things like investment in schools, investment in public housing, that something like this is able to be going and getting not only small contractors but big contractors engaged has made a real difference here.
In terms of South Auckland itself, it's probably the site of our most famous dispute around the treaty in recent years in Treaty Land around Ihumato. And I'm wondering how that sort of compares to what was promised, what's happening now, because I realise there's big excavations going on there and a whole bunch of sort of archaeology work going on there, to how you go about filling the needs really for people who have a place to live. And you contrast that to the commercial work that's going on at somewhere like the airport, which is relatively nearby.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating question, Paul, and I'm interested in that area. It's just outside of the boundaries of Manurewa. It's in the Māngere electorate, but it's still really important to me as a South Aucklander who, I want to live in a city where we recognise not only our natural history, but the history of colonisation and of people who lived here before there was a manako and a sprawling metropolis that is the Auckland city. And Ihumātao was occupied by protesters for years to recognise, the development that was set to be going on there, but also the way we use land around some of our most significant archaeological sites. There have been preserved rock yards, middens, and human settlement there for hundreds of years, and so it's important that we get a sense of that as Aucklanders and can appreciate these things which have been really preserved. I went there recently to visit what has been set up as a youth homelessness site by Pania, who was one of the original protectors of Ihumātao and the kaitiaki there, as well as the local community. That's been done alongside government to support young people who have serious housing needs into homes there. But as far as building goes for the community, that's still a work in progress. I think it's something that shouldn't be rushed. We need to have iwi and mana whenua alongside government when we are providing houses for people where their needs are complex there. And there is a community that lives in that kāinga there, and it's not just like building in a greenfields development. We need to get these things right, and that takes time.
Blake, jump on in before I take over
I
completely.
just gonna say, and sorry you're gonna have to cut this, but we forgot to tell you that after we finish, just stay there, or we can send you an upload link, don't leave because we have to upload the file. Anyway,
My team did tell me this, Blake, and I please do thank you for the reminder, because I it would be easy to jump off, and I imagine you've had guests before that have done that.
Yeah, we just send you a link afterwards and it uploads in the background. No
anyway,
need to stress.
back to the show. So you talk about the construction side of things and what's going on around the airport and everything up there in Auckland. We've had, as you may or may not be aware, we recently had the minister himself on, which we were very lucky to do, and he mentioned a lot about. This was prior to his earthquake announcement, which we will get to imminently. But he mentioned about disabled housing, and he's open to feedback and to working with Labour around the disabled housing. So I imagine this is the first you've heard of it. So hearing that off the bat, how do you feel about that?
I think
yeah.
we really need to be working with him on making sure that there is, actively a role for the state in providing more housing for a range of disability and access needs. This was, a really important part of Labour's program when we were developing more kainga order homes, but also setting the rules alongside councils to ensure that there was more development for access. There are some parts of the earthquake rules, which the minister has recently announced after he appeared on your podcast, that will change the requirements for developers who are bringing their buildings up to spec for earthquake, where they do not also have to then do the buildings to comply with disability and access requirements, which is probably swimming in the wrong direction there. But we have committed to working through the rules in a very even-handed way with him, and I'm really wanting to see feedback from the community about the way that those rules will play out for people with disabilities at the select committee stage. We can all see areas where there are additional costs for some building owners to bring their buildings up to spec for people with access needs. But, if we find a little place here and a little place there where those rules are creating costs and so need to be relaxed, then we will end up with a system where we've found a place and it's come down, and found a place and it's come down, and found a place it's come down, and then in 20 years, 30 years, for our children and grandchildren with different access needs, we will end up with a wide open net where there are not the right protections in place and not the right regulations, where people can't access these buildings, and where people's safety is at risk in emergencies where they need to get out. So that is something that I'm really concerned about. Also thinking through, the way that government have made various changes along the way to funding for access for people with disabilities is going in the wrong direction. I think they've done a bit of a 180 on that, with Louise Upston recently announcing some changes for more accessible funding. But when that comes to getting around buildings, getting around homes, getting shelter for people, we've got to be committed to this over the long term, and in a way where governments of both stripes, blue and red, are supporting access and disability housing to be built. Because if we don't do that, then we will end up with a real shortfall for generations to come.
And I guess it goes back to, the reports we've seen in recent days around some disabled people ending up in rest home care. And we don't want that to become the norm. We want to be able to have accessible, reliable, warm, safe housing for our disabled people. And I did mention to the minister's office in preparation for this interview that, it seemed to be a flaw that they missed, and they've seemed to acknowledge that. So my concern there then is I have a real concern that they're, a bit too fast for some of their policy, and it's great that a government want to move fast, but sometimes it can be a bit of a hindrance too. And not till someone rings you or texts you or anything to point that out, they go, "Oh, we did get that wrong,"
Yeah.
sort of thing.
No,
Yeah.
you're completely right. Like, and when you hear me saying we've committed to working through those changes, say at the earthquake rules, and I want to hear from the disability community about that. I'm still another politician saying we need to be, testing out these rules with people who we're relying on people like you coming along unpaid to give the government advice about how these rules are going to play out in people's lives when we know that any sort of deregulation for buildings rules around that make it harder for people with different access needs to get into buildings and then get out of them, that is going to be really tough. And that is a decision that we must take very, we need to be serious about what that costs for people at the same time as considering what it costs for building owners. And I think it is a really high cost, and that those decisions, will mean that people are in really difficult situations. And so, what this government is doing there, we have to be really clear-eyed about that. That it's going to make some people's lives worse.
Hmm. Is there anything you want to ask around this, Paul? Before I
Well,
go.
I'm actually kind of curious about the combination of all sorts of announcements that have kind of happened in the last couple of months around building. We saw the deregulation around self checks, essentially, and self regulation with certain parts of the construction industry. And then we saw an announcement around sort of rolling, what feels like rolling back some of the earthquake safety stuff, depending on where you are in the country, which kind of to me feels a little bit scary because I know the whole country shakes from time to time. And then you add into that things like your disability sector issues that crop up where you need special needs built into some of these um, places that get built up. From a Labour Party perspective, what's the big picture here that you're seeing being presented by the government at the moment? Is there they're targeting something really specific like builders and construction people or investors, or are they being really broad and trying to make something that appeals to everyone that isn't necessarily going to fit within a nice little cubbyhole?
Mm. Well, I would say the good parts of this reform is the right kind of supply side thinking that we need right now. And when I say supply side, I mean making it easier to build and cheaper to build. When the government is not making interventions on the demand side, so they're not making it easier for people to get into rentals, they're not making it cheaper for people to get housing. If they're not prepared to make those sorts of interventions, then let's go for the supply side and let's bring down costs. That makes sense. And that is an economic vision that the Labour Party also shares. We want more housing than we need. We want more building than we need. We need more builders qualified, because that sort of abundance and that sort of vision for growth, that's a good thing. However, with all of those changes combined that you have been talking about, Paul, we start to see a picture of deregulation that followed a playbook from, I guess, the early 1990s in New Zealand that resulted in, decades of building work that it wasn't at the standard that we would like to compare ourselves to around the world. And it meant that people, we're still paying, say, higher energy costs in buildings because they weren't built to environmental standards, where our earthquake rules in some places were very strident, but in other places, they weren't popularly supported, and now you're seeing a walk back from that. And it was the National Party in through the years from 2011, and they then introduced legislation in 2014 around earthquakes. They designed those rules, but they are now walking them back because when you had the finance minister at the time was Bill English, and he was saying we need to essentially bail out one of these insurance companies, AMI, with $500 million of government capital. He also needed to say on this side, and we're going to regulate so that never happens again. Now, if that regulation is walked back, that deregulation agenda that you're also seeing around things like building products, making it easier to bring in offshore products at the expense of some New Zealand suppliers, that whole picture is a watering down of rules which have created a kind of network of protections for New Zealanders and our building system. We cannot predict exactly what will happen there in the next few years. We are trying, as the Labour Party, desperately to get right into the detail and to help the government do this in a way which is also something that we would do, because there are plenty of things in here that we would do too. Supplying cheaper and faster buildings to the New Zealand public is something that we really must do. And when we talk about housing for disability community, I mean, there are just not enough houses in our city centres and in our regions that work for people with a range of access needs. And so that is a good goal for the government. But to do that without making interventions on the demand side is going to be a really hard ask for National. So that is why it's really important when you don't have those school builds going on, you don't have a pipeline of large infrastructure builds, where the construction sector are crying out for changes that will make it possible for them to plan out long term, that we're not then being hasty on this side with our supply side measures.
With the government's cancellation of a whole bunch of like Kāinga order builds, for example, where they have contracted the construction industry, and we're seeing that as an industry that has a lot of brain drain at the moment, heading overseas because people need to work. They head to somewhere like Aussie to get that work. How much does that then impact what changes a government can implement to try and rebuild that industry?
Exactly the right question. One I am puzzling over. One, National or Labour will need to be dealing with a real crunch in a few years' time. Might be 2 years, might be 3 years, might be 4 years, might be 5, depending on your economic outlook. And a range of the economists from the banks are sort of predicting that sort of upswing soon. In that time where the economy picks up and it is good, the construction sector must not lag behind, because what you see again and again playing out in other jurisdictions, say like the UK, where they didn't get this right, it took 3 years behind the economic upturn for then the construction sector to pick up again. Why? People. There was not a pipeline of people. The apprentices were gone. They were working with people who were in their 50s and 60s and close to retirement age, who were hanging on because business was good, and then they weren't able to train and bring on new people alongside the industry. That is a disaster economically, because it means across the sector you have a real lack of resilience, and people wanting to get out of work and not being able to take on those big jobs. What do we need to do? Apprentices. That is the number one thing that Blake, if I could get you to do the interview with the Minister of Building and Construction again and put to him the best thing that he could be doing for New Zealand's construction sector right now, I would say it is this: that National promised to keep apprenticeship boost, but they cut it in half. It should be doubled. It shouldn't be halved. This is exactly the time when we need those 19, 20, 21-year-old guys and gals getting their tickets, getting experience on work sites, getting signed off, so that they can then be looking to save for their own gear, be getting into their own small businesses, and be upskilling, so that in 5 years' time they're the bosses, and we've got Kiwis in all of the regions who have the skills they need to get cracking on bigger jobs.
You'll be glad to know that he's already asked for a follow-up.
Brilliant. I need you to push.
I have questions for him about other stuff as well, but I'm going to leave that for a very different interview.
Surcharges are something which small business owners hate. These are the charges that the credit card merchants will charge to, say the cafe that I'm looking at right now at the Auckland airport might be paying $1,000 a month, perhaps $2,000 a month in a big month. And they, happily pay that because that's a charge of doing business. But at the moment, they can tell people, they can be clear that if you are going to use a credit card or if you're going to use Tap and Go, that you're going to pay that because that's what it costs them to be able to use those services. Under National's law, they will not be able to tell people, and so they will not be able to pass those costs on, and so they will have to wear it on their balance sheet. A lot of small business owners, particularly hospo at the moment, we've got thousands of hospo businesses going to the wall in this economic downturn, and because of the government's choices around surcharges, they will now be being asked to shell out thousands of dollars a month to cover that from their baselines. It's just not feasible. Their prices are going to go up. They're going to take a hit. So they're telling me, well, look, we just won't be able to offer that sort of payment anymore, and we're going to have to wear it with our customers. It's going to mean, my 19-year-old barista is going to be arguing with the lunch rush about taking payments. We're going to have people walking out, but we're just not going to be able to do it.
And then this might be a bit over your lane, so if you don't want to answer it, then that's okay. But we saw the Minister of Small Business Chris again and announced some changes around helping people make sure their Facebooks are retained for their businesses. So, have you got any thoughts on that one?
On Facebook, being able to run like small business transactions and the way that
it's around the so people getting locked down and then having to contact an email to get it back and making that process easier.
That's a really interesting one. Directly, this hasn't come up for me, but what I can say about the way that the platforms are dealing in the New Zealand market, that is somewhere where it would be useful for government to focus for those businesses that are, transacting through those platforms, because we get a real range of New Zealanders who are making a living using various online platforms. We've got a New Zealand-owned company that we're really proud of, TradeMe, wanting to take more of a market share, being the New Zealand small business platform of choice. And then they're competing with the overseas-owned giants. TradeMe come to me and say, we're playing by all the rules. We're doing the best we can for businesses, and we are really, really proud of the way that we are contributing to the New Zealand economy. But those guys are breaking the rules. They're making it harder for people to access their accounts. It's easy to get locked out, as you say, but it's also easy for scammers, straightforwardly scammers, who are known to the platforms to be breaking the law, to be posting up ads which are scams. They don't get taken down, and those big platforms are actually making money out of that illegal activity. So it's quite common for New Zealanders to see ads which are straightforwardly scams, and for money to be being paid to those platforms for them to have them up. And TradeMe has a system where that doesn't happen, and they have real human people who are taking those down, but the big platforms don't. So they have said to me, if we want e-commerce thriving in New Zealand, if we want New Zealand businesses on an even footing with their international counterparts, then the government needs to come to the party and make sure that the playing field is even. TradeMe and other New Zealand platforms aren't looking for special treatment, they're looking for the same treatment.
Finally, from me, and then I'll let Paul wrap this up. So, with you saying that, then he announced also that it'll come to the general public in the future where they can, if they get locked out, they can contact a special area, because from now up until now, Meta hasn't had, in particular, a person-to-person contact thing, which I got affected by personally twice when I had to pay $130 each time to get it fixed with an IT company, which is very bad because I rely on it for clients and other things. But anyway, do you think this will be beneficial when it rolls out to everybody? And I've already told him that he should have done it immediately, and they've also acknowledged that.
I do. I think that will be beneficial, and congratulations on your advocacy, which is obviously a matter of difference. I'll follow it up as well in written parliamentary questions to the Minister, because I want to make sure that that is something which is going to be rolled out for New Zealanders and going to have the effect. That person-to-person thing, that might seem like some people might be listening along and say, oh, that's not the role of the government. They shouldn't, be in the business of asking individual corporate entities to do their customer service in any particular way. I disagree with that. When it comes to these huge entities, which are bigger than countries and transact more in cash than most OECD nations, there is only one thing that New Zealanders have any recourse to that is big enough to deal with it, and it is their government. This should make collectivists of all of us, Blake. We should all be looking to the state to use the power and the levers that it has to make sure that people are being treated fairly online and just getting their rights recognised. These are already laws, these are already rules. There are already a number of things in place which any given New Zealand business that you went into and saw on a personal basis would have to comply with. So why do these giants not have to comply online?
Yeah, and people like myself shouldn't have to pay exorbitant amount of money just to get their account there, because Meta's AI thinks that you're a different person, sort of thing.
Yes, it is a question of dignity. It is a question about how we as citizens should be able to engage not only with the state but around business and the marketplace that we all consent to and agree to. You're so right, and more of this advocacy is obviously needed, because how's it going to look in 10 years? If we don't get this right now for future generations, then the kind of society that we could be living in and our kids could be living in looks very different.
Do you want to wrap this up with anything, Paul?
Yeah, I have two questions for you. One's actually should be a relatively easy one. One is a little bit more complicated. With your youth portfolio, I'm kind of curious what your response was to the Prime Minister's "pull yourself up by the bootstraps" comments over the weekend to 18 and 19-year-olds who have been told to go out and find work in an economy where there's no work to find.
Oh, it's more of the same from this government. They're finding people to have a crack at. And, it has been Māori, it has been young people, it has been supermarkets and energy companies. They seem to be getting off pretty lightly, but, there's a theme, and the people who don't fight back are still copping the flack for it. Look, I think young people in New Zealand are actively working as hard as they can in their school and in their work. There is a real shift for this generation of younger people. They're not drinking as much. They're not taking drugs as much. They're not engaging in risky sex. They're not engaging in risky behaviours. What are they doing? They are saving more, but they are still getting into more debt. For the people who are getting into debt, they're taking on more of it because it's being marketed to them. They are in more financial hardship. There are more reports of young people accessing emergency services and emergency food grants. Young people are experiencing more homelessness than ever before in New Zealand. There are real financial stresses on this generation of young people. So to say to 18 to 19-year-olds, and these are the people who we're talking to, people with no adult, right? The Prime Minister is talking to young people with no parent who will stand in for them, no auntie, no uncle, no flatmate. He is speaking to some of the most vulnerable people in New Zealand, and he is saying, well, your option is to go and get a job because I did it. And that misses the point. These are young people who have not had any of that support, and so that is the role where government needs to say, actually, I don't care what has got you here yet, but you're 18, so we are going to do what we can to make sure that you have the wraparound supports around you to get you on the right track, because you will cost our society more if we don't sort this out now. We need to be investing in, this is National Party bread and butter, where the social investment required here at the beginning of a young person's career and work life is such that if we get this right now, we will save money in the future. But that's not what he said, because I think it is politically popular to find people who are, open to being on the wrong end of a government sort of telling off, and it's bully pulpit politics that we're seeing around the world, in America and in the UK and other places, and we don't want to import that here. I think New Zealanders are a bit wise to that kind of thing, and I don't think this will be policy that's sticky for National or the ACT Party.
Okay, and then the easy question: local body elections this weekend. Have you voted?
I voted yes, and I have to do a special vote because I'm not on the published roll. So have some sympathy for anyone casting either a special vote or an unusual sort of vote where you don't get to do it in the mail. But for anyone who has their papers sitting on the fridge under a magnet, or maybe it's in the adult drawer under your phone somewhere, please get them out. Please tick the boxes. It is so important to be able to have your say on these local issues. And, for anyone who is interested in the kinds of issues that this podcast canvasses, these are exactly the issues that local government really, really needs to have a say on. The kind of buildings that we build, where they go, what we are spending collectively on our infrastructure pipeline, who's getting a slice of that? Those are all issues which are decided by your local governance, and you can really be the deciding votes in some of these races. Sometimes local body elections come down to 2, 3, 4 votes. So now is the time. Get your vote in an orange bin before Saturday.
Perfect. Arana, thank you so much for joining us. It has been absolutely fantastic. Hopefully we're not keeping you from catching your flight, and it's a decent day to travel. Very much appreciated.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Ka kite.
Hey, thanks for sticking around till the end of the video. While you're here, why not hit that like button or share the video or even subscribe to the channel. You could even become a paid YouTube member so you can see things released in advance, you get access to some exclusive content, and like all these awesome people, you get to have your name at the end of the credits as well.